August 17th, 1943, 27,000 feet above the patchwork farmlands of central Germany, the sky is a brutal, icy expanse. The air temperature outside the B-17 Flying Fortress is 40 degrees below zero, freezing anything it touches. Inside the unpressurized fuselage, condensation from Staff Sergeant Clarence Winchell's breath instantly freezes, drifting through the air like snowflakes. The wind howls past the open gun port at 200 miles per hour, carrying with it the acrid scent of high-octane aviation fuel, cordite, and something else. Something that seasoned airmen like Winchell know all too well, the metallic, sharp stench of fear mingled with adrenaline. The mission today is monumental. The 8th Air Force has sent out 376 bombers, a vast armada of B-17s, each one packed with defensive firepower. These bombers fly in tightly packed combat boxes, formations designed to be impenetrable, defended by over 1,650 machine guns. On paper, the B-17 is the perfect strategic bomber, an aircraft that can fly during the day, strike precision targets deep into enemy territory, and survive without fighter escorts. It was meant to be a force of nature, self-sufficient, deadly, and above all, invulnerable. But this morning, in the skies above the Reich, something is about to change. The Germans, with their sharp eyes and deadly precision, are about to prove that no fortress, no matter how well armed, is truly invincible. The B-17, once seen as the pinnacle of American aviation, is about to be exposed for what it really is, an aircraft with a hidden flaw, one that will cost the lives of hundreds of young men and alter the course of the air war forever. This is the day that the myth of the Flying Fortress will be shattered. When Boeing first presented the B-17 Flying Fortress to the military in 1935, it was hailed as a revolutionary design. It was an aircraft unlike any the world had seen. The B-17 was a strategic bomber built to defend itself, an aircraft that could fly in broad daylight, strike deep into enemy territory, and return home without the need for fighter escorts. In an era where bombers were typically vulnerable to enemy fighters, this concept was groundbreaking. The B-17's armament was formidable, 50 caliber machine guns mounted on various parts of the aircraft, each strategically positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. The idea was simple. A formation of B-17s flying in tight combat boxes would create an impenetrable sphere of lead, making it almost impossible for enemy fighters to penetrate. The B-17 was not just a bomber, it was a flying fortress. American military planners and engineers believed in the doctrine wholeheartedly. They thought that the B-17 could fend for itself in the skies, with its defensive armament forming a wall of fire that no enemy fighter could breach. The B-17's crew had to trust in this doctrine. They had no other choice. The idea that a bomber could survive a daylight raid deep into enemy territory without fighter escorts was not just a planet, was an unshakable belief. Initially, the Luftwaffe pilots, accustomed to dealing with British bombers that had little defensive firepower, were wary of these new American formations. The B-17's reputation preceded it. German intelligence briefings warned their pilots about the heavy armament and overlapping fire fields. For the first few engagements, the Germans approached the B-17s with extreme caution, unable to find a way to break through the dense flak. But the B-17s were about to face a rude awakening. The doctrine that had been built on belief, on faith in overwhelming firepower, was about to meet the harsh reality of war. The first cracks would appear, not in the armor, but in the tactics. The Germans were learning, and soon the Flying Fortress would no longer be seen as invincible. At first, the B-17's reputation as an invulnerable flying fortress held true in the skies over Europe. But the Luftwaffe was learning quickly. German pilots, accustomed to the limitations of their earlier tactics, began to develop strategies to neutralize the B-17's overwhelming firepower. Initially, their attacks came from the rear and sides, exactly where the B-17's defenses were most formidable. But soon, a realization began to take shape in the Luftwaffe. Attacking from the rear was a death sentence. The B-17's machine guns were positioned to defend against those angles, and German fighters found themselves torn apart by streams of tracer fire. The B-17's defensive gun positions were impressive, but not perfect. They had been designed to defend against attacks from certain angles, but there was a crucial blind spot: the nose. The bombardier and navigator sat in the nose of the B-17, surrounded by plexiglass, with minimal armament to protect them. Early B-17 models mounted only a single .30 caliber machine gun in the nose, a weak defense that could hardly fend off an attack. It was Oberleutnant Egon Meyer, a skilled and methodical Luftwaffe pilot, who first identified the fatal flaw in the B-17's design. After surviving several engagements with B-17 formations, Meyer spent weeks studying the aircraft's defensive structure, analyzing the gun positions, angles, and weak spots. What he discovered was a devastating vulnerability. The B-17's nose was virtually defenseless, a target waiting to be exploited. Meyer's breakthrough was simple yet deadly. He developed a tactic that would exploit this flaw: the head-on attack. German fighters, knowing the B-17s were most vulnerable in the nose, would position themselves ahead of the formation, then turn directly toward the bombers and dive in, closing the gap at a terrifying speed. In the moments of the attack, German pilots could fire their 20mm cannons into the B-17's nose, where the bombardier and navigator were seated, destroying critical flight controls and often killing the crew. This new strategy was quickly adopted by the Luftwaffe, and soon the B-17's reputation for invulnerability was severely damaged. What had once been a fortress, impervious to enemy attack, was now a target with a fatal flaw. The Germans knew they could not overcome the B-17's firepower from the rear, but now they had found the key to unlocking its defenses. The head-on attack became a preferred tactic, and by the summer of 1943, the B-17 was no longer the terror of the skies it had once been. The morning of August 17th, 1943, was supposed to be another chapter in the story of American air superiority. The 8th Air Force launched Mission 84, a major strike against the Messrs factory in Regensburg and the ball-bearing plants in Schweinfurt, targets deep within the Reich. These were critical industries for the German war effort, and destroying them was vital to crippling the Nazi war machine. But the mission was doomed from the start, not by lack of effort or bravery, but by the fatal flaws of the B-17 itself. 376 bombers took off that morning. The plan was simple: fly in tightly coordinated formations, strike the target, and return home. The belief was that the B-17's firepower and the sheer number of aircraft in the formations would be enough to fend off any German counterattacks. The formation had its usual defensive advantage: thousands of .50 caliber rounds ready to intercept any enemy fighters. But this mission would prove the fatal weakness of that belief. German fighters, using the head-on attack strategy, quickly descended upon the B-17. These fighters came in waves, coordinating their attacks from the front, exploiting the B-17's vulnerable nose. American gunners struggled to respond, firing into empty sky or shooting at targets that were already gone. The defensive firepower that had once been a deterrent became a disorganized attempt to stop something that could not be stopped in time. One B-17, ruthless, took a direct hit, 20 millimeters round through the nose. The bombardier was killed instantly, the navigator severely wounded. Despite this, the pilot fought to keep the plane in formation, trying to bring his crew home, but German fighters returned, circling ruthless like vultures. Another wave of attacks finished what had already been started. The aircraft disintegrated at 26,000 feet, its crew scattered across the German countryside. Meanwhile, another B-17, Jersey Bounce, had its own fight for survival. Damaged by enemy fire, it fell behind the formation, becoming a straggler, an easy target for the German fighters who circled like sharks. For 23 minutes, Jersey Bounce fought back. Its gunners shot down at least one confirmed German fighter, perhaps two, but it wasn't enough. The aircraft, crippled by damage to two engines, eventually went down near Upend, Belgium. 3 crew members survived, 7 did not. The number of B-17s lost in Mission 84 was staggering. 60 bombers, 16% of the attacking force, were destroyed. This was far above the acceptable loss rate. In some bomber groups, the loss rate exceeded 30%. The 8th Air Force, which had once believed so strongly in the invincibility of their formations, was now forced to face an uncomfortable truth. The Flying Fortress was not invulnerable. The American airmen had been told they could rely on their overwhelming firepower to protect them, but in that moment, it was clear that firepower alone could not save them. The sound that defined this battle wasn't the roar of engines or the crackle of machine gun fire. It was the constant rain of empty brass casings hitting the aluminum decks of the bombers as their gunners reloaded, fired, and reloaded again. Each casing represented another shot fired in a desperate attempt to stop something that was coming too fast, too deadly, and from too many angles. The gunners fired over 1.5 million rounds of .50 caliber ammunition that day, and in the end, only a few German fighters were confirmed destroyed. The rest had already made their mark. The losses were devastating. 600 airmen killed, captured, or missing. The sky that had once been dominated by American bombers was now stained with the wreckage of their failed doctrine. The 8th Air Force had learned a bitter lesson. The B-17 was not invincible. Its defensive armament, no matter how formidable it appeared, could not stop a well-coordinated, well-executed attack by skilled German pilots. The catastrophe of Mission 84 marked a turning point in the strategic bombing campaign. The horrific losses forced the American military to confront a painful reality. Daylight bombing raids deep into enemy territory without fighter escorts were unsustainable. The B-17, once the crown jewel of the American air campaign, was not the invincible fortress it was believed to be. Its defenses, impressive on paper, could not withstand the relentless head-on attacks that the Germans had developed. The raid on Schweinfurt, combined with other early losses, proved the weakness in the doctrine that had been built around the B-17's firepower. Despite its ruggedness, toughness, and ability to absorb damage, the B-17 could not survive the brutal, calculated attacks by Luftwaffe fighters who had learned where to strike. The loss of Ruthless, Jersey Bounce, and so many others was not just a blow to the American Air Forces, it was a blow to the very foundation of American air strategy. In the wake of the devastating losses, the 8th Air Force temporarily suspended deep penetration missions. It was a tacit admission that the original concept behind the B-17, the belief that it could defend itself and survive long-range daylight raids without fighter escorts, was flawed. The American airmen were not defeated, but their faith in the doctrine was shaken. Something had to change. What followed was a critical shift in strategy. The arrival of the long-range P-51 Mustang in early 1944 changed everything. With its superior range and firepower, the Mustang could escort the B-17S deep into enemy territory, preventing German fighters from making head-on attacks. The once vulnerable B-17, now accompanied by a protective shield of Mustangs, could finally fulfill its intended purpose. Loss rates dropped dramatically, and the strategic bombing campaign resumed with renewed vigor. But even with the arrival of the P-51 Mustang, the memory of the losses from Mission 84 and the summer of 1943 would never fade. For those who survived, the haunting sound of spent brass casings hitting the floor of the bomber fuselage remained a symbol of both hope and futility. In the midst of the chaos, the gunners clung to their belief in the firepower, in the promise that enough bullets could stop anything. But the truth was, the B-17 was not invincible. It was a tool, an incredibly tough, reliable, and resilient tool, but only when supported by a system that could address its weaknesses. The B-17's legacy would live on. It would go on to drop more than 600,000 tons of bombs on Europe, earning its legendary status. But its true value lay not in its ability to act alone, but in its role within a larger system. A system of escort fighters, trained crews, and an industrial machine capable of replacing losses at an astonishing rate. The B-17, as magnificent as it was never the fortress it was once imagined to be. Instead, it became a symbol of the American military's ability to adapt and learn from failure. In the months following the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid, American strategists and airmen came to understand that firepower alone could not guarantee success. The system, the network of aircraft, pilots, factories, and ground crews was the true fortress. The B-17 was never invulnerable, but it was tough, and it had one thing that no German aircraft could match: the sheer force of will and resolve to continue fighting, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. By the time the B-17's final combat mission was flown on April 25, 1945, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. The American bombers had won the skies, and yet, even as the war drew to a close, those empty 50-caliber brass casings, once thought to represent victory, had accumulated in piles, on the floors of bombers, in the hands of gunners, and in the memories of all those who had fought. They became a reminder of the belief in firepower of the faith that 16 guns could solve all problems. But the truth was more complicated. A fortress, even one that flew, has too many points of vulnerability. And it's only through understanding those weaknesses, adapting to them, and creating a system to support the aircraft that victory could be achieved. The B-17 Flying Fortress never became the invincible weapon that American doctrine had promised. It wasn't the fortress that planners envisioned. Instead, it was a testament to the resilience of both the aircraft and the men who flew it. The B-17 was a tool, an exceptionally tough, durable, and reliable tool, but only when it was supported by a network of fighters, factories, and an unwavering spirit from its crews. When the P-51 Mustang escorts arrived, they changed the game. The Flying Fortress was no longer alone in the skies. But the true power of the B-17 was not in its ability to defend itself with firepower, but in the system that supported it, an unyielding system that ultimately allowed the Allies to win the skies over Europe. In the end, the myth of the invincible fortress faded. The B-17 became a symbol of something much more profound: the American ability to adapt, to learn from its mistakes, and to keep fighting, no matter the cost. As the war in Europe came to an end, the B-17's legend endured, not as a story of invincibility, but as a story of resilience, courage, and the unwavering belief that victory is achieved, not by firepower alone, but by the strength of the system that supports it.